Nosferatu costume review, let's go. I have to say, I've been seeing screen caps of the movie for a while now. I had high hopes. I thought it looks really good. Was it actually good? Was it historically accurate? Let's see, shall we? The movie is set in 1838, and I have to say, it actually stuck to the proper dating. A lot of the movies will be set in one particular era or year, but then it would fluctuate between the styles that the director thinks are more appropriate. So for example, in this case, they could easily go for 1840s styles since they're a little more strict and a little more gothic in a way, but they did stick to the 1838 dating, which I think is a good sign. We're gonna start with everything I think actually really worked with women's wear. So if you've been on this channel before, you know what my pet peeves are. Inappropriate undergarments, bad silhouette, bad hair, clothes that are not necessarily in line with what was worn in the era. All of that, I have to say, with some exceptions, was actually, they complied to my rules, so to speak. First of all, the sleeves. You gotta give it to my girl Sleeves. She ruled this one, she ate. Sleeves in this movie were actually really good. And we will also talk about menswear in a second, but when it comes to women's wear, there was all sort of honeycomb gathering, there was all sort of ruching, there was all sort of billowing sleeves that are gathered at the wrist that I personally found really unattractive.
Personally, I found it very attractive.
Did you?
Speaking of ruching, gathering, etc., the details of the dresses I thought were really well made. A lot of dresses in modern cinema just lack details, or there is no time for details. I have to say, they did have time for details. There were a lot of things like piping, tiny rows of lace. There was this one spiked edge of the dress in one scene that I thought was really well done. In general, the morning outfits, really, really good. Also, interesting use of fan-laced stays. These did exist. Stays that were laced at the back and then they would be sort of closed in front. So they fitted the narrative. I will not get into them going into corsets being oppressive again. First of all, she wasn't even wearing a corset. Second of all, the whole idea of, oh, she'll have to sleep in her corset because it's gonna keep her tight. I'm not getting into that. That's a separate video. And also they did say in the interviews that it was this idea of being corseted and how it affected your mind. Maybe if you had mental issues in 1838, that was genuinely a problem. Maybe if you were not neurotypical, that was also a problem. So maybe they are actually right, but it's just this narrative of, oh, I've done a period piece, so now I have to shit on corsets because that sounds interesting. Again, the actress probably had to wear it for like 16 hours straight while also convulsing profusely, so fair, but at the same time, it's really getting tiring. Like the narrative of corset being this oppressive tool that is like literally the only garment that you can show female oppression with is getting really tiring. There is a lot of other ways to do it. I also have to say the jewelry was really interesting. All of the pieces, I can't quite put my finger on it because they looked like they belonged in the era and at the same time they were very distinct and they were very in line with the movie plot. So I personally really liked them. That was the good things. But that's not what you're here for. Okay, so I was like a tiny bit disappointed because all of the screen caps that I've seen prior to seeing the movie, where they looked really good, the outfits looked really good. Then when I watched the movie, I was like, okay, some of them were fantastic. I have to say, it's really good costuming still. But at the same time, I just can't shake off this feeling that costumes are just not made in the way they used to be. And it sounds awful because I know that people working on that movie have spent hours and months creating like the best thing they can do, but I'm still thinking there's just not enough time anymore in movie production to make good costumes. And I'm gonna explain that to you because I'm not just shitting on it for no reason. First of all, the fabrics. I know it's very difficult to find appropriate, like period appropriate fabrics nowadays. Some of the dresses you can just tell they were supposed to be much thinner. So what I'm saying is in the 1830s, in the already Victorian era, because Queen Victoria was coronated in 1837, this is 1838, so in the Victorian era, fabrics were very, very delicate, very fine. They were woven in a way that we can't even achieve nowadays because we just don't have the right tools for that, which is honestly something that you can't really escape if you're making a movie nowadays. You're not gonna find Victorian weaving machines to get the right fabrics, but you can still, I believe, work your way around it by choosing appropriate fabrics that are the closest in feel and in looks to what was used back then. For example, some of the fabrics here just look chunky, they just look too heavy. I think the worst one for me was Anne's gold dress, which used this like very heavy, chunky brocade, and it just did not sit right at all, that dress. Not to mention the weird cutout shoulders, but okay, it's a design choice. But basically, fabrics back then were much thinner, and fabrics in this movie are quite thick, which is why I think some of the silhouettes just don't really sit right. Speaking of sitting right, where are the petticoats in this movie? There is just, everything is a little too floppy for me. There are no petticoats, or the petticoats are just not wide enough, because the dresses are falling to the ground in a way they should not in 1838. Everything was about puffiness. And I know it's difficult to make 1830s dresses that do not look like you're a doll, and this is probably not appropriate for the vibe that they were going for, but that does not mean that the dresses have to be deflated. Also, where is padding? This era was all about padding and filling out the spaces in your body that were just not there. So especially with the bodices, I feel like this area right here could have used a lot more padding. And I know that because I've made early Victorian dresses and it really shows, and I didn't use padding because I couldn't find any, it really shows, especially if you're a thinner woman that just does not have that fat in this area, like me, you really need padding for it to sit right, because that's what the cut of the dress did. There was no padding in this movie. I think the bust area also could have used padding, not to expand the bust per se, but to round it. A lot of tailoring in that era was about things being very round and very smooth. I did not see that here. However, I will say that in terms of like corseting and how the silhouettes looked from the back, it was mostly very well done. Another pet peeve of mine, and it's such a minor thing, but again, that's what I'm here for, to nitpick on other people's hard work. The neck. Why was Ellen's neck not covered like at all at any time during the movie? Every time she wore a cape, her neck was completely exposed. And I'm not saying it should be covered for modesty reasons, but we know it's cold. November, December, it's winter. So at least a little collar, please. She's dying out there. She's actually severely ill. You're gonna have to cover her up properly. So that was my pet peeve, especially with the large bonnets, that the neck just stayed open like this. And speaking of bonnets, when I saw that one screen cap that they used to promote the movie, I was like, this is fantastic. This is gonna work really well. Then I saw the bonnets in the movie. I was like, that's actually not at all what they were in 1838. Maybe the shape of the brim was looking quite right, but what happened to the crowns? Why are they structured like this? I just don't really understand the inspiration here. All in all, still a really nice detail. I am still amazed that they chose to wear hats because it's such a vibe. And there was this one bonnet that she wore to a funeral that was just, I have a thing for see-through bonnets. I can't deny, I don't know why, but it just was delicious. Also, there was something off about nightgowns that she wore, and I saw the nightgowns in the movie. I was like, something's not working working here, and then I checked the period nightgowns, like what they looked like. First of all, movie nightgowns are always way too long. They did wear quite long nightgowns, but they were never those like really floor-length billowing gowns in that period. And second of all, something just doesn't sit right with the neckline and the sleeves, but it's acceptable. I think it still looks good, and it's still much better than giving her this like really sexy lingerie type nightgown that we've seen in other movies of this type. So it gets a pass. I thought the hair was really good for the era, but I do have an issue with Anne's hair primarily because you can tell it's a wig. And I think it's important when you have a period piece and you're using wigs to make it completely undetectable and to make it not look like a wig. Whereas here, I don't know, maybe it's also accentuated by the unnatural hair color, but it just is very wiggy. One of the things I noticed that I was like, oh, they were really in a rush, was Ellen's striped gown. You know the scene where she like rips her gown open? First of all, ouch. Anytime a costume gets torn or destroyed in a movie, I'm like, God damn it, poor costume department had to make like 10 copies of this so they could take retakes. But also, maybe it's because of that. Maybe it's the fact that they had to make so many copies of it. Maybe it's the deadlines. Maybe it's the production department hurrying them. But the back of the dress, the stripes were completely misaligned, and I'm not the one to pick on that. I usually don't care about stuff like that. But when you think that it's supposed to be a period dress, they usually at least tried to align it somehow. But at the same time, it's possible that in this period you would only have a certain amount of fabric. You would not be expected to align the stripes and the patterns every time because you had to work with what you had. This is the dress that appeared a lot in the promos, and I personally think it's probably the best dress in the whole movie. It's gorgeous. The amount of details, the sleeves, the fit it's just perfect. Like, I have no notes on this one. This dress I personally think is really good, but again, the fabric used is just too heavy for the period, and sometimes it works. For example, in The Favorite, they just use denim for certain things, but in this particular era, I don't think it works with the amount of details. In The Favorite, the dresses, the mantuas, were very structured and very like crispy, whereas here it's supposed to be very soft and very romantic, so I don't think the fabrics work very well with the silhouette. I found the Romanian costumes quite interesting because it looks like they did do the research. I'm not actually well versed in Romanian outfits of the 1830s, but judging by the fashion plates and the drawings from the era and the illustrations from the era, and also by my own recollection of general trends in Highlander fashion, this is definitely looking pretty good. One thing I will say is this is probably the only scene in the movie where the clothes are like properly worn down, and I will talk about that in a moment. I also really liked the bride look. I thought it's a very interesting play on the 1830s wedding fashions, but it looks quite inspired to me by the juvenile fashions of the 1830s, so something that a young lady would wear. Let's get to menswear. I don't often speak about menswear when I do costume reviews like this because I don't know much about it, and 90% of the time the menswear in the movie is like completely insignificant and rather bad. This time I was actually really impressed. It's honestly really good. First of all, the fit of the clothes. Some exceptions which I will talk about later, but the pants, the vests, the jackets, and most of all the shirts. We need more historical movies where the collar is digging into the man's jaw. We need more of those, please. Can we start a petition? Because this is, I mean, you can see why. Also, I was talking about sleeves. The sleeves on the men's shirts. We need more billowing sleeves in period dramas. Bring back billowing sleeves. In general, I like the attention to details. For example, in the opening scene, he's wearing a vest and the back of it is linen, like really plain fabric, because that's the way it would have been back then, because the vest would never be shown to the public without a jacket on top. So you didn't have to waste precious fabric on the back of it. This is the kind of details I love when it comes to costuming, because it shows that someone's done the research and they were probably like, like, why are all the period vests made of linen in the back? So this is something I really appreciate. In general, the color palette was great. The details were great. The hats were quite good. I think they could have been a little bit taller, but they were not bad. The pants could have been a little bit tighter, but I don't think modern audience is ready for that. So this was good enough. I quite liked the professor's funny embroidered cap, like as a way of building a character while also remaining period. No, in general, I think they were really good, but the coats could have been fitted a little bit better. They were a little loose, I would say, for the period. And also the shoulders were a little bit too wide sometimes, but that's like nitpicking. That's literally like, what bad can I say about the men's clothes in the movie? But overall, the thing I had a problem with, and that mainly applies to menswear in the movie, was that things just looked unworn. Generally, that was the issue with men's outerwear, like coats and sometimes jackets, but they looked brand new. And it's a common problem in movies, but usually when someone pays attention to details to that extent, they also pay attention to making sure the things were worn. And a lot of the characters in the movie were not poor people, but still, I don't think they were necessarily very rich, which means that the clothes would have been a little bit worn. And it's not even about making them like rugged and full of holes and stained, but it's this feel of someone has worn this before. It's not the first time they have it on. There are methods of achieving that. I think a lot of cosplayers can relate to like weathering their clothes, but I'm just surprised they thought that that's enough. Because, for example, Professor's coat, the brown one, it just looks new, and it shouldn't look new. He's a guy who's been stuck in his cave of an apartment for years. He's been studying the occult. He should not look that fresh and crispy. That's what I'm saying. And I think a lot of the blame for historical inaccuracies in costumes is to put on the director and the producing team, because they have a certain vision, which is good. They should have a certain vision. That's what the director is there for. But at the same time, they probably often don't listen to the costume department. You know, a lot of it is just not someone's active choice. That's what I'm saying. So I always try to keep that in mind. It's not anyone's fault. It's creative choices that we can like or dislike, but it has nothing to do with those people's abilities to create art. It just has something to do with like how I'm unhealthily obsessed with costumes looking right. Okay, that's it. I guess the overall takeaway is very good. Concerning the recent movie productions that are set in that period, I think it's really good. Concerning other productions that were made years ago that were also set in that period, could have been probably a little better, but I still think it's a great piece of work. Just keep in mind that every time we dissect a movie here, it's only for fun. And we don't actually mean to diminish the work of anyone that worked hard on this movie, because it's a good movie. I quite enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. That's it. That's all I have to say. And I probably need to take these hair down because I do look like a Victorian widow, unfortunately. So, bye!